Hi everybody and welcome to another edition of FAQ, Faith and Quarantine. I'm Krish Kandaya and each day we look at a different part of the Bible to see how it helps us to live well and understand life in lockdown. And this week we're going to be looking at what it means to come out of lockdown. Now, I'm not talking about the technical ways that we come out of lockdown, social distancing. I want to give you a kind of biblical frame or a hope for what it means to come out of lockdown. You see, in the Bible, there's a prophetic tradition. That's people that receive messages from God to pass on to the nation, or people that are asked to speak up to God on behalf of the nation. Probably the biggest and most well-known prophet in the Bible is Isaiah. And Isaiah had some really tough words to give to the people of God about they were going to be living in quarantine. They were going to be living in exile. Their whole way of life was going to be disrupted. They were going to be living far from those that they loved, far from the places that they knew and trusted. Their lives were going to be turned upside down. And God told them why they'd been brought into this kind of circumstance, but he also told them how they could come out of it. And it's that coming out of it that I want us to learn from Isaiah. But we're going to have to dig into some of the reasons why they went into their form of quarantine at the time. And I don't know about you, but Isaiah is a bit of a daunting book. It's got hundreds and hundreds of words in it, over 66 chapters, and many people don't even bother attempting it. In fact, for some Christians, there's only one chapter of Isaiah that really matters, Isaiah 53. And to be honest, for a lot of my Christian life, that was true for me too. Isaiah 53 is amazing because it tells in almost incredible detail the way in which Jesus would die. It's a prediction of Jesus's crucifixion and what it would accomplish. And I'm not even going to look at Isaiah 53 because you probably know it really well. And if you don't, ask me some questions and I'll do my best to answer them for you. But I want to give you a bigger frame. And so I need to start at the first chapter of Isaiah. And to be honest, for a lot of my Christian life, I'd never read it. So let's figure out the reasons that the people of Israel were first in exile, why they got to be quarantined for their faith, and see if there are any lessons for us to learn for our circumstances. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 1. The vision concerning Judah and Jerusalem that Isaiah, son of Amos, saw during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. We get a bit of an introduction there. There's going to be a massive turnover in the kings of kings of Judah during the time that Isaiah is called to be a prophet. He's going to see lots and lots of different changes in government. Maybe you can relate to that in your part of the world. In the UK, we've seen lots and lots of changes of our government, prime ministers primarily, but not necessarily our Queen, who's been doing a fantastic job keeping the nation together. But there's been a lot of turnover. There's going to be a lot of turnover in political leadership for the nation of Judah. And Judah is the southern kingdom. Israel's the northern kingdom. And so we're being told this is going to be a time of great political change. And Isaiah is going to be a constant voice speaking God's truth during this. For me, that's a challenge to us as the church. Will we be a constant presence, or will we just come and go whenever a different political leader comes into play? You know, when the Conservatives are in, will Christianity speak up? When the Labour's in, they won't. We want to be a constant voice of encouragement and truth and challenge and hope in the public sphere, whoever's in control. Verse 10 is a bit of a scary introduction to the kind of next phase of where Isaiah's going. He's going to tell you exactly why the nation of Judah are going to be punished. Here we go. Verse 10. Hear the word of the Lord, you rulers of Sodom. Listen to the law of our God, you people of Gomorrah. Now, you know you're in trouble when God's people are given the names Sodom and Gomorrah. If you're familiar with the Old Testament, you'll know that was the watchword. Those places were the watchword for debauchery and evil. And God actually brings punishment on Sodom and Gomorrah. You might remember the story. I've written about it in my book, God is Strange. It's one of the weirdest incidents that you can imagine. It involves the attempted gang rape of angels and the wiping out of a city with fire and brimstone. But God is saying, look, you might think that feeling or that way I reacted to a group of people is restricted to people who are not part of the nation of Judah. They're not Jewish people. That's how I punish pagans. But God is saying, no, that same mindset is present in the nation of Judah. That's why I'm going to call you Sodom and Gomorrah. Verse 11, the multitude of your sacrifices, what are they to me, says the Lord? I have more than enough of burnt offerings, of rams and the fat of fattened animals. I have no pleasure in the blood of bulls and lambs and goats. When you come to appear before me, who has asked this of you, this trampling of my courts? Stop bringing meaningless offerings. Your incense is detestable to me. Your new moon, Sabbaths and convocations, I cannot bear your evil assemblies. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. When you spread out your hands in prayer, I will hide my eyes from you. Even if you offer many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood. I sometimes get people to give a little review when I'm preaching, and it's a little bit naughty, but I normally get to give a sermon after someone has led us in worship. Could be on an organ, could be on a guitar, could be with a choir, and I just ask people to turn to their neighbour and say, what would you give our worship out of 10? And people all look a bit embarrassed, particularly the worship leaders, and I'm normally really nice to them and say, look, okay, sorry, this is just a little bit of an exercise, don't panic. And people find it hard to evaluate worship. And some people say, the music was a bit samey compared to last week, or not sure that it had a theme. It just seemed to be a bit random. I know that our family often reviews worship on our way back from church. We often walk to church, or we used to before the lockdown happened. We still review the worship after we've watched it online. And sometimes the kids will say, oh man, we sang such old songs. They were from 2019. A whole year has gone by and we've got loads of new music. Why are we singing this old stuff? Or I'm not sure the preacher really knew what they were talking about. They seemed to be like a plane in fog at Heathrow. They just kept circling and circling and they never really landed. And I say to the kids, well, I'm really sorry, kids. I will try to do better next time. Don't let me be such a bad preacher. But we often review worship. And normally by reviewing worship, we're saying, well, how did I feel about it? Did I get something out of it? Was the sermon funny? Was the music funky? Was the kids' talk engaging? Did I feel spiritually uplifted? Was this good for my soul? Now, the only person who can review our worship is the one to whom our worship is offered, and that is God. And God reviews Judah's worship here, and it's not flattering. I don't know if you caught it. Words like, I cannot bear, I have no pleasure, stop trampling my courts, stop bringing meaningless assemblies, I cannot bear your meaningless assemblies. God is not happy with the worship of his people, and he tells them to stop praying, to stop meeting, to stop offering sacrifices. Well, God is the one that invented the sacrifice system. Why would he say not to have it? God is the one that said Sabbath would be a day for him and that we were supposed to lift our hands up in prayer. There's lots of injunctions in the Bible to pray. Why does God say, stop, I've had enough? The problem isn't necessarily what Israel and Judah were doing in their gathered worship, in their rituals, in their prayer meetings, in their singing. It wasn't necessarily what they were doing there that was the problem, it's what they weren't doing elsewhere. Now, in my book, Home for Good, which is a book I wrote with my wife Miriam, talking about why caring for the vulnerable really matters to God, and particularly vulnerable children. I unpack Isaiah 1 and I give an illustration. I remember my oldest son used to cycle to school each morning, even when it was frosty. And I asked people to imagine that my son was going to cycle past your house on the way to get to his school. And imagine he took the hill a little bit too fast and the corner near your house and he's bombing down the hill and it's icy, and so he goes flying off the handlebars of his bike and he skins his arms and his legs and he's all in pain on the floor, but he notices your front door. And then just using his elbows, he manages to crawl his way to your letterbox and he shouts out to you, help, help. and you recognise his voice, and you open the door, and you bandage his wounds, you give him a hot mug of cocoa, and then with another responsible adult, so you don't break child protection protocols, you get him in your car and take him to my house. Now, if we were acquaintances before, we are friends for life, that you would do that for my boy. That's incredible. It would cement our relationship, wouldn't it? That you would care for someone I love so deeply, and you would care for him so well. But wind back the story. Imagine that my son went bombing down the hill, came off his bike, skinned his arms and his legs, and then made his way to your front door, shouts, "Help, help." And you say, "Oh, I recognise that voice. That's Chris's boy. I never did write to Chris to say thanks for the FAQs. They were helpful. Hint, hint, drop me a message or like and share on Facebook or on YouTube." And so you start to type on your laptop a lovely message of encouragement to me. And you say, "Oh, Chris, I'm really grateful for everything you've done." In fact, you put it in iambic pentameter just to make me feel especially proud of the effort that you've put in. Now, if I found out that you did that, you wrote me a lovely email and you did that instead of helping my boy, if we were friends from before or even acquaintances, it's almost like you're dead to me now. How can you think that flowery words are some kind of substitute for caring for people that I love? That's not a swap. And that seems to be what the nation of Judah were doing with their worship to God. They were loving turning up and singing some songs and raising their hands and praising God. And they were loving doing all that, but they weren't doing anything helpful to actually look after those in need. Look where Isaiah goes next. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 16. "Wash and make yourselves clean. Take your evil deeds out of my sight. Stop doing wrong. Learn to do right. Seek justice. Encourage the oppressed. Defend the cause of the fatherless. Plead the case of the widow." Defend the cause of the fatherless. Plead the case of the widow. All of your religious activities don't count for anything if they're not combined with actual care for vulnerable people. This is why the nation of Judah are going to be put into quarantine, because they have neglected justice. And therefore God is going to bring punishment on his people and take them far away into captivity, into Babylon. And it's going to be really tough there. And they're going to be there for a very long time because they've disobeyed God's call to justice. And this isn't the only place in the Bible where it talks about this. But here it's so clear. You cannot substitute worship for caring for those in need. In fact, you might say, if you care about worship, worship by caring. Now, what are we supposed to understand about this for our day and age, for lockdown? I can't tell you that what's happening in our world is God's direct punishment for the way that we've lived. I believe the world is broken in all sorts of ways. It's beautiful and it's broken. It's an incredible paradox. There's a tension between the wonderful world that we live in and yet how broken and difficult it is for so many people. 850 million children go to bed hungry each night, and that was before the global pandemic. Thousands of people dying in horrible circumstances around the world. I don't think that's God's specific judgment on one nation or one group of people, because it seems to just touch so many different types of people. Rich people, poor people, black people, white people, all sorts of people are being affected by this. So this is not God's specific judgment. But in the middle of this lockdown, we're having a reset, a reboot about how we live. And what is coming to the fore is that the kind of people that we're celebrating, the heroes that we're recognizing, are people who will look after the vulnerable. We're cheering on care workers in those difficult situations in the care homes where the elderly are being particularly targeted by the virus. Or we're recognizing NHS workers who are putting themselves in the line of danger in order to protect the vulnerable people. We're having a reboot, and we're coming round to the fact that the kinds of things that God says that we should care about, defend the cause of the widow, look out for the fatherless, look out for the oppressed, those are the things that we should be valuing. And if we get this right as we come out of lockdown, we will know the blessing of God, because those are the things that God celebrates. Those are the people that God is particularly attentive to. So I can't tell you that it's exactly the same circumstance that brings the coronavirus to our world, but we can still learn the same lesson about who we need to be prioritizing. Friends, you know I run a fostering and adoption charity called Home for Good, trying to inspire people, particularly Christians, to offer their homes and their hearts and their houses as places of sanctuary for vulnerable children to come. And it's directly out of passages like this, that in the end, our worship is not just about our singing or our Bible reading or our knowledge or even turning up at a church. It's about caring for those that are in need. And what's amazing about lockdown is it's forcing us to think about what it really means to be church right now, because we can't gather to do our singing. We can't gather face to face to listen to preaching on a Sunday morning. And so we've been meeting digitally, and that is half of the kind of equation. How do we meet to encourage each other, to stay faithful to the Bible and to honour God? But the second half of the equation is, how do we work out caring practices, practical ways we can show love and mercy to those that are in need in the middle of lockdown? And we're seeing incredible things happen. I heard of HTB Church in London, over 100,000 meals have been given to frontline NHS workers just from one church. I've heard of 1,000 churches across the country that are combining together using the Your Neighbour app to find practical ways to care for the elderly, or a phone line where you can phone and get someone to talk to you. The church is trying to think, how does it care for the oppressed? How does it look out for the cause of the widow and the orphan? And that is such a powerful thing for us to be doing right now. And we're aligning ourselves with the kind of worship that God wants us to give him. And that will help us when we come out of lockdown to live as God's people in a really powerful way. Not just now, not just in the future, but both and. Because once we got those two things together, right sung praise and right worship and adoration to God, and the right showing of God's love and compassion to those in need. Once those two things are combined, as they're being combined in churches around the country right now, so there's a moment where the explosive grace and joy and compassion of God bursts out from the church to the rest of the world. That's when things get exciting. And when we get the wrong side of that, that leads to the judgment of God and God sending his people into quarantine. I hope that helps. Each day this week, we're going to be looking at another passage of Isaiah, teasing out of it lessons that we can learn for living well now in lockdown and beyond. Lovely to talk to you. Speak to you again soon. God bless. Bye.